Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi. In our last episode, we talked with Parag about his early career, including his time at BankBoston and Imperial Bank. He also touched on the lessons that shaped his approach to navigating the complexities of private credit and entrepreneurship. If you missed it, be sure to go back and listen to part 1. In part 2, Parag takes us deeper into his journey as he transitions to Hercules Capital, where he established and led the life sciences practice, scaled the company into a multi-billion-dollar public fund, and tackled the unique challenges of firm building. He also reflects on the importance of corporate culture, balancing work and family, and how these experiences laid the groundwork for founding K2 HealthVentures.
And I know you eventually, the road led to Hercules Capital. Can you talk a little bit about how that opportunity came about? And you talked a little bit about already, you alluded to the banks, having a kind of a regulatory framework that perhaps limits the creativity. Can you talk about your pivot into private credit and ending up leading your life science practice at Hercules?
Yeah, that's another one of these not fully planned moments, but you kind of take in all the information you have and you make a decision. I think after the Comerica acquisition, trying to make it work for a year, decided, okay, let me take my learnings here and see if I can go start my own fund. So went out there to fundraise. We raised a bit of walk around capital from some early investors. It was also interesting in that personality type that maybe both my wife and I are. We had our son, first child was born. He was just a couple years old. 2 years old. My wife also she had left her job because she decided, after her son was born, I want to do something that using my former background out of the business world. And she went back for her PhD in clinical neuropsychology. So wow. We're both sitting there, 2-year-old, and I'm like, well, should I leave my job? I'm not going to have a salary. And she's like, well, I don't have a salary either. But let's see how we make it work. Well, we with a little walk around money, we had a little capital coming in, but we said, okay, we're young. We'll figure this out. And we can always go back to something, right? Give a certain time frame to make it work. Went out there, put together a PPM, was naive enough as a 3-year-old thinking you could raise your own fund as a first-time fund manager, right? But hey, gotta try. So
gotta try.
So, we got out there. We were out there for 7-8 months, more like 9 months trying to raise capital. We met all the LPs all around the country, LA Teachers Retirement System and XYZ's, endowment and so on and so forth, and 100 meetings. Some were starting to gain traction, but as we were doing it, we were getting feedback around, again, like trying to understand a life sciences debt fund. I don't really understand biotech, most of the LPs, and 2, debt to biotech. That's like 2. The overlapping, that Venn diagram overlap was super small with people who actually would get that. So there are a lot of very interesting, but I don't get it at all type of questions. So, you take that feedback in and you start to see okay, well, if I keep persisting at this, it might be possible. But we were also getting feedback that, hey, life sciences alone, maybe you need to be more diversified. Maybe you need to be broader than that. And at that summer of this is summer of 04, sorry, I guess 20 years ago, a former colleague from Imperial Bank who had left, Roy Liu, gave me a call and said, hey, I just joined this new fund, Hercules. I'm employee number 2, right? And we're doing technology. We're out there fundraising, but we're getting feedback that we should be more diversified. I'm like, funny, I'm getting the same feedback.
Yeah.
Said, Roy, but I don't know about that because I'm trying to raise a fund as well. He's like, oh, really? So we kept our dialogue going. And a few months later, after, again, hitting multiple brick walls, I was like, okay, maybe it makes sense to join forces. So started talking with Roy and the CEO there. And it was a little bit of a moment of like, oh, I wanted to do my own thing.
Yeah.
But okay, now I'm going to be working for someone. But that being said, it was very early. It was just less than 10 people. I was going to head life sciences. So it was still going to be entrepreneurial, and you're going to help build this thing pretty much that had just started. And I joined when they had raised their first 25 million in capital. Private, Hercules was private, raised their first 25 million. We did 2 deals in tech and 2 deals in life sciences. And then in middle of 05, less than 9 months after I joined, the window was open for finance companies to go public. And it was earlier than anybody at Hercules thought would happen, but people were like, people are interested in this space. Let's try. We went on road shows, et cetera, took the fund public in June of 2005. And, now instead of 50 million in capital, we had 150 million in capital to play with. Right. So that was the beginnings of Hercules. I was then there for a total of about 11 years. We went from being a small esoteric public BDC to being $1 billion plus public fund that did technology and life sciences lending, added a clean tech lending unit through the years to that. And it was a lot of fun for the first 5, almost 7 years of it, I would say. There was some really, really great memories from it, and there were some really tough lessons learned around maybe greed and personality types that sometimes the investment industry has more of a tendency to attract, if you may. And I'm saying that being in the industry, so I feel like it's fair to criticize your own, but recognizing that our CEO at that time really, on the one hand, super smart, a lot of credit for what he built, but also very, very difficult personality, and created a very hard culture that led to a lot of people ultimately deciding to leave. So a very impressive fund was starting to kind of internally have a lot of conflict at different points in time. And at some point, and I was headed up life sciences, we had grown, we had done during those 10 years, $2 billion plus of investments to over 100 different life sciences companies, private, public. We expanded into Canada. We did deals in Israel. We did deals in Europe. So there was built a great team. Part of the reason I survived despite the crazy culture is that I was in Boston. Our CEO and some of the other management team was in Palo Alto. So there's a geographic separation. But it was also, we were life sciences, and most of the other side, and where our CEO knew more about, was tech. So we were a little bit more left alone. So we had a little bit of culture within a culture of how we could operate. But at some point, being highly concentrated, having a lot of kind of stock in there, and realizing I want to work with people I really want to work with. And I'd lost some of the Like I'm willing to work 120% when I truly believe in something. And it's hard not to when you truly believe. But I was finding myself like, I'm not putting in that effort because I am not believing in some of this, what we're doing, and some of the people and how this is going. And I tried to make the changes. I was on board calls there. I was in a lot of the board meetings. I was not afraid to say my mind. I got fired several times,
Okay.
asked to come back. So I never actually left the door, but before I
Yeah.
left the door, I was asked to come back.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you learn, and it's maybe I was grateful again to be in positions where I could speak my mind for myself, but also for people who couldn't, who were also being affected by it. And I had the bully pulpit. I had the opportunity to say it. And it was almost like, if I don't say it, what am I doing? Right. So, but it was painful, right? It's painful to get into mode where you have to, where you're arguing, screaming, like feeling like you're an asshole in the process because of how you're talking to your CEO or others, right? And I remember the board once recognized, and they got us an executive coach. They got people executive coaches, and one of the best lessons I learned, and as entrepreneurs, you'll always work with, some point you will, and whether entrepreneurs or not, anyone listening to this, right? You will work with difficult personalities, or you might have very difficult personalities in your life. And this is a broad generalization. And then one thing one lesson that really sticks with me is that, I was telling him, like, it bothers me what I'm becoming. Like, because of the way I talk, the language I'm using, it's fraying my nerves. Like, I don't like it. And he's like, oh, I totally understand. Here's a tool you can use. When you get on a stage, when you're giving a speech, it's a tool that a lot of people use. You become the actor. Become a personification so that it's not you saying these things. It's the person you need to be such that the message is heard. If you, in that moment, need to become a raging lunatic so that the person who's hearing the message will actually be listening to you and maybe make a change, well, become the raging lunatic for 20 minutes and then go back to yourself. So it's not you, it's who you have to become. And that really helped in terms of that period, because, when you have to do it more often than you like, it helped kind of separating like your own self from trying to deliver a message. But anyway, long story short, I think it was a really, overall, a really fun path for that time frame at Hercules, for what we were able to do for the industry and grow in size from doing what the banks were doing, 5 to 10, to do more like 15, 20, $25 million, and provide more capital to that industry and build out a group of people that really actually got trained in this too. Your teams are getting trained along the way. Lawyers are pushing the envelope and creating, docs and safeguards along the way. And there's lots of people. There's a great attorney at Cooley, John Hale, who's like one of the founders in the space of doing documentation. So I work with him. He taught me a lot. His mentee, Cynthia, is still our attorney today at K2, right? So all these lessons get passed on, and things don't grow in a vacuum, right? They grow because one person teaches somebody else, and you can innovate a little bit along the way. And your intuition grows through all your experiences, and you can impart that along the way. So eventually, I had run my course there. So at some point told the board, good time for me to head off. The team's in a solid place. I'll transition out, and did that in 2015.
And there's a couple, or actually a bunch of things that like kind of like stuck out to me. And I think the first one is just like how important culture is for an organization. I think a lot of the time culture can be like, oh, it's kind of this like fluffy kind of qualitative, like, it's not overly quantitative. So maybe we'll just like it's a secondary priority. But like from what I'm hearing from your like lived experience is that like no, it is like it is the utmost priority if you want to have like cohesiveness and longevity, because like I think the like you said, you can kind of feel yourself like when you're in that environment for too long, it can start to like it starts to just like things can go parabolic like in the up and to the right, things can also go like I think culture is one of those things that compound in the opposite direction too, when especially when you're growing pretty quick. So I think it's like something I've always thought about, just like building a culture with intention, and because every single hire it rubs off onto the future hires too. And if you don't one kind of like be a guardian of that culture, it will go the entropy, there's a natural entropy to it, and it'll just become pure chaos.
That was very well put. Very well put.
And so, and I guess like just a quick question too on going public. It seemed like Hercules went public pretty quickly. What, like, I'm going to imagine things change a lot when you take it public, when you take the company public. Was that like a kind of a turning point in terms of like how a company, I'm more familiar with like, and I think there's a lot more investment companies that go public, like the Blackstones and the KKRs of the world nowadays. But like, we see a lot of investment funds that are still private, and I'm going to imagine they can operate very differently than a publicly traded one. Can you talk a little bit about that dichotomy of like being a private investment company and then being a publicly traded BDC?
Yeah. Great question. There's pros and cons to both. One of the great pros of Hercules, and these sort of crack the fundraising code, if you may, on this, is that once you go public and if you perform, meaning you're doing well, you're showing that your strategy's working, you're providing, because it's lending, you have interest income coming in and you have nice dividends flowing to your investor base. You can raise capital very much easier than in the private side, right? You have all the tools of a public company. You can, do a new offering. You can raise capital overnight. You can, raise bonds once you get big enough, right? You can finance yourself and really turbocharge your fundraising capacity to the extent that you have use cases to put the capital to work in, right? So that Hercules got better and better and better at over time. And the current version of Hercules is a engine in that space. And the new CEO there, who's not new anymore, is great in that arena as well. So they're in a very good place overall. Have still a lot of friends and colleagues there, many who on the life sciences side I initially hired in. So I'm great to see how well everybody's doing there. But the downside of being public is that you can't be as long-term minded in what you do, because you have quarterly earnings pressures. So there's a certain expectation, and if you're not meeting it, the market environment may not be as favorable, be less favorable, maybe better or worse, etc. You might make certain decisions because you need to get earnings, which is sometimes in conflict with the best interest of your portfolio companies. Different examples of that in terms of whether you would refinance the deal or actually let them just pay us off, because then I can recognize all the income today. And I need that income in this quarter, versus refinancing the deal and pushing it out. So there's different reasons why sometimes in public companies you can't think as long-term in terms of your investment landscape. But the benefit is, as a public, you have your fund is evergreen, right? Your capital is permanent. You're not sitting there in an LPGP private sector where you're raising capital every couple of years. So yeah, we definitely took some of those lessons in my current iteration. But the benefit of being private is that you don't have, as a private fund, if you can recreate a little bit of the evergreen, which, you're fortunate to do that, great. Then you have the benefit of having some of that access to capital and recyclability of capital while still being able to be long-term minded, not having public company pressures, not having to build out a public company infrastructure and cost for that, and being more efficient overall in the marketplace.
I love that explanation, because I think sometimes for founder operators of like biotech companies, understandably so, there's not as much awareness on kind of these kind of pressures that the investors might have. Like if you're a publicly traded fund, you probably have these quarterly pressures to perform, which would then lead an investor to behave a certain way. And so I guess to get kind of just like zoom out, is very important for anyone out there to just understand, whoever you're partnering with, what are the pressures and priorities that they have to abide by in order to find the right partners. And like, there's no perfect solution. It's just like, what's right for you? Like, who is the right partner for you? And there are plenty of iterations and ways that this kind of manifests. And I'm very interested. So now you've kind of seen what it's like to lead a publicly traded fund, and eventually it sounds like that you knew it was time to leave Hercules. When did you know it was time, and did you know what was up next?
Yeah. I had no idea what was up next. But I purposely did not want, when I knew it was time, which was a full year before I actually left, and I knew I had sort of lost my ability to work the way I thought was needed to grow, I would be doing a disservice by staying longer. And I wasn't enjoying it the way I did just a couple of years before that, that I should leave, and then we'll see. And so I purposely, because it was a pretty intense thing when you're building up an investment firm and you're growing and you go from, 10 employees to 50 employees, and you go public and you're doing all that, and you're working across a fairly large portfolio and managing the positives, but also the problem. So then we went through 2008, 2009 downturn, and the crisis that happened, the financial crisis that happened then, managing through that. So a lot of both micro and macroeconomic learnings along the way. It takes a good amount of energy. So I was like, you know what? It's time to take a break. And it's also time to not have any preconceived notions of what's next. And maybe there will be very little for a while. Maybe there'll be nothing. And actually, there's part of me that was like, maybe it's just, I will go do something completely different, nothing to do with anything in this space, but I don't even want to know about that. I don't want to be tempted. And when I did leave, I didn't even tell people. I didn't send out that blast email that said, hey, everybody, I'm leaving. I just let people find out through the grapevine over time, because I purposely didn't want to get tempted by anything. It was an opportunity to spend that much more time in a more relaxed way with the kids. I mean, one thing both Aparna and I, my wife and I, were very good about, and something I like, even, and this would be another thing I would push as a lesson in entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship can be all consuming, but you have to really make a strong effort to, from early on, find a balance. Because if it's all consuming, you will burn out much earlier than you should, because you're going to need the sustaining energy. And in the meantime, you will have forgotten about other things that are priorities and more important than what you are doing for your own self. I mean, entrepreneurship is great, but it's a lot about, I want to, I'm building this. For me, like, family always came first. wife and kids always came first. I didn't miss a single game or show or anything of the kids, whether it was at 3 p.m. or 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. You did that, and then you figured out the work otherwise. And it works when you have by grace, a good relationship where we both could balance that for each other along the way. And I'm, again, eternally grateful for the fact that that is the case, and that we were able to juggle that crystal ball and never let it drop. I think that's, if you can do that, not always, there'll be periods where it's hard, periods that are more intense and you feel like you're dropping it. That happens. We're all like, we can't do that perfectly, but at least it's the intention. Your true intention is to try and make that work that way. So that was important even throughout Hercules. So I always felt like, okay, even though things might be a little crazier, I'm happy over here. Right. But yeah, when I gave notice to our CEO and our board, and they said, well, don't just, I said, first I said, I want to go part-time. I can't do this full-time anymore. They're like, okay, we'll figure out a role. Then 6 months into that, I said, you know what, in 6 months, I want to leave. They're like, okay, we'll transition it out. So it was a good way. The transition worked out well. And I left in April 2015 with really nothing planned at all. I ended up cooking a lot more, taking care of everything at home, and just, hanging out and getting to the kids' schools that much more often than I was before. In the meantime, there was a 3.5-year transition period between when I left Hercules and ultimately started K2. So it was a good period of for a while doing nothing and then a while dabbling here and there. So I'll pause there for a second, but
yeah. And I think that's it's kind of right between your undergraduate and your master's program. You took the gap period, which was important.
Yeah.
And because I think you're exactly right. And I'm a victim of what you kind of described, of the entrepreneurship can be all consuming. And I was recently, just talking, to kind of other founders out there too. And it's the same feeling. If you don't, in the very beginning, with intention, design balance and boundaries, it's like air in a room. It will just expand to fill the room.
100%.
You look, and then, you kind of then you black out, then you black back in, and it's oh crap, the air has filled the room for a very long time and other things have atrophied. And, it's very important for any founder out there who might be experiencing this right now, especially, and it's friendships, family, relationships, those also take work. Relationships are not just things you can set on autopilot and just hope that it's going to, live to be the same thing after you go on this entrepreneur, burning the candle at both ends with entrepreneurship. So it's kind of this thing. I in the early days, I didn't know that. And so I was screw it. We're burning this. We're burning it. And I could see kind of things kind of fraying. And then I was like, okay, we can't have this happen. But it's hard, because everything
Totally.
is telling you to do that. And, a lot of I think, and I really appreciate your candor around this, because I think in a lot of the airwaves in the media, there's the beating of the chest of these founders who are it's kind of grind culture,
I don't know. Yeah. Grow at all costs, grind, work, 18-hour day, 15-hour days, whatever. And the new reality is you could probably do, as if you're efficient and disciplined and you made other things priorities, and I have to be here at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 5 p.m., whatever it is, you're just going to be damn more efficient.
Yeah.
your stuff done. And then, okay, you might clock back in at 8:39 after having dinner with your family and because you have to, because you chose a journey that is not a 9 to 5 journey. You chose a journey where there's a lot of things on your head and risk in your head and whatever. But, I think that modality is a lot more sustainable. And I know lots of entrepreneurs, and you don't hear about, they work in that mode. Like they've found a little bit of that secret, if you may, right? Like, hey, we do waste a lot of time because we're like, oh yeah, I have the whole day. I have until 11 p.m. at night. And then you don't sleep well. It's the whole mess.
Yeah. And I think too, it's kind of like I don't know if this is the exact phrasing, but it's like the creativity is like, I guess, the cousin of, or whatever, constraints. The constraints increase creativity and obviously efficiency. And when you can kind of get inefficient if you don't have these constraints on your schedule. Much like capital too, right? Like if you raise too much capital, you lose the discipline. Like you as much as you would think that you can maintain the discipline when you're just seeing like hundreds of millions of dollars just like sitting in your bank.
Totally.
Right?
You have too many biotechs that are burning $15 million a month in the ecosystem.
Yeah. And like, it's kind of where the constraints actually are helpful. Like they're actually helpful. And it's not only on the capital side, but it's also on the time side, exactly what you're describing. When you set these boundaries, you ultimately figure out a way to make it work. Like, and you end up being more productive. You end up doing it the more efficient way. And I think that really, from my own personal experience too, for Exceeder, I was just like you when I was a bench scientist. So I was like, I don't know, like, I'm just going to go figure out how to get money to buy this first piece of equipment. And lab equipment's super expensive. And, it's kind of like we dipped our toes and really, it started really small. But those constraints of like the access to capital was really constrained in the early days. It formed like some of the best habits, like as a firm, like the DNA of our firm. And I encourage any founder out there to pause for a moment and think about what you can do with the resources that you might have, even if it might be limited, because I think you'd be surprised how much you can actually achieve with a limited amount of capital. And I think it was Kravis from KKR talking about how debt has a way of like sharpening you or making you focus. So, and you said it way back, when your experience at Bank Boston, like your lenders make you stronger. When you have a lender that's analyzing everything about your company, it sucks to hear that, like when someone tells you like, hey, this doesn't look so good, because you're like, well, it's my baby, but how can it not look good? But then you fix it and you're like, oh crap. Like, I almost think it was like our capital partners, and particularly our credit partners, there's a lot to that. Like it's almost like free consulting, to be honest. You're like, thank you. I appreciate that. And
fair. But that's a good point.
Until like, talk a little bit about like the constraints and just like that kind of like that good hygiene. I think a lot of life science companies, when you build those foundational blocks, are how you can, like you talked about how do you make this a sustainable practice rather than just like a supernova. So now you've had this moment to kind of decompress, reset, and kind of realign and start to figure out what are the kind of values in which you're on your next venture. Can you talk a little bit about what was the driving force to found K2, and talk a little bit about how your experiences up to this point helped you design with intention K2 as a firm that you could see go the distance rather than, kind of burning the candle at both ends?
Yeah. So, during that break time of that 3+ years, it was good because I just wanted, I needed the subconscious to be and see what came out of it in terms of what would the interesting next path. In the meantime, my wife started a company with some of her ideas. She had at this point become a clinical neuropsychologist. She was working with kids with special needs, with a whole spectrum of different folks from young ages to older teenagers, and seeing a similar issue that cropped up in terms of the inability for information to flow well between all the different providers, right? In a way that people could actually, a care team around anyone could do better, because but people didn't have the information. She would write these massive reports after all her analysis, and a lot of times things wouldn't be able to be implemented because the social worker, the parent, the teacher, the speech language pathologist didn't have that access to that same information. So created a tech company with her former MIT friends and colleagues to try and solve this problem. So she wrote me in for a bit to be the good free laborer and
Cool. Yeah.
do some operations, payroll, and that, and help raise a little bit of capital. So that was fun working together. We got a chance to really be on the operating side, and we put our own capital in, and we raised some capital, and this thing started. But I see the entrepreneurial journey from her view, because it's one thing being on the investment side where it's the other thing operating something that started in her head, right? A piece of paper. Okay, let's create this. Let's whiteboard it out. Let's hire the team. Let's get that first employee. Let's get space. Let's develop the software. Let's test it. Let's start getting customers. The whole bit. It's a crazy journey as well, right? So, I know, I'm sure think about you. We often say it's like holding on to the tail of a tiger.
Yeah.
Like, it's super exciting ride, but you're like, don't let go. Otherwise you're just consumed by the process, right? Try and enjoy it. So that's been a balance as well. Anyway, that was going, and I was sort of just part-time helping there, part-time helping something else in the biotech space. And I think through that, I realized it was operating stuff is pretty interesting, but I'm not that great at it, and I'm not super cut out for it. And then I was like, well, how can I apply all my learnings in a way? And I'm like, at the end of the day, the best place you can apply it is within your arena that you've been in, right? But is there a way to do it differently? And around that time, a couple people called, and this is now a good 2.5 years in, to say, hey, have you hung up your shingle, or are you thinking of getting back into this? And at first I said, I'm not ready yet. And then I said, so we started talking. First group of people I talked to weren't really the right set of people to work with. And I was like, I'm not doing that again. Been there, done that, not doing that. And then a former colleague who I had hired at Hercules, and who is now my co-founder at K2, Anup Arora, called me, and he was still at Hercules, and he's like, look, I know a group that's looking, right, at doing something here. I'm thinking about it. Where's your mindset? I'm like, I'm thinking about it. And he's like, look, I'm still under, a CDA here, so I can't just talk, but if you're interested, I'm happy to talk to this group. So that's how we started chatting about if we did this, how would we do this? What are all the lessons that we've learned in our collective, decades of doing this out there, and how would we do it differently? And we had several long sessions sitting in restaurants and, bars and Zoom call. Did Zoom exist then? It probably didn't, actually. Whatever it was.
Yeah.
It was pre-COVID. So Zoom wasn't. Yeah, Zoom wasn't a thing. So, this is 2018. So we decided, look, if we can do this in a way where we can really do private credit, but do it with a deeper diligenced approach, and an approach where you really get deeper into the underlying such that you lead with debt. You're providing primarily debt capital, but you're able to go across the balance sheet to provide also as opportunities arise. With a lot of these companies, they do, hey, we've done all the work. We can also do convertible debt. We can also do equity. So go across the balance sheet. That was one thing we're like, let's see if we can design that and see if there's capital for that. And then the corollary says, well, we need a team, hire the right team of people. So A has to be, to your point, people that you think are going to help you develop a culture that you really want to work in, and people you really want to work with. Because now I was definitely in a position where I was like fortunate, like I'm only going to work with people I really want to work with. So that's also, again, grateful for just being able to say that, right? So that was criteria 2. And then we wanted to make sure that, because part of my previous thinking in my head was like, well, if I don't go back in here, I want to do stuff in the nonprofit and public sector areas, which are much, don't have as good access to capital. Where can I use my expertise to help, right? To do more work in the space. So I said, well, got to throw it out there. Let's see if we can convince some investors to say, look, let's take a percentage of our profits and allow it to flow into underserved healthcare. So create over time, once we do have the profits, to create a K2 foundation. And, because this is another maybe important thing to try and do, think what your real intentions are, and then don't be scared to put them out there. And then, as a good friend of mine told me in grad school, still one of my very close friends, Aleem Walji, is like, really touch base with what your intentions are. And this comes from a book. It's not like he didn't make this up. I was like, the universe will ultimately conspire to help you, but you have to be clear about what it is. You can't be putting out the wrong messages, because then that's what's going to happen, right? Well, maybe you have a chance for the right thing to happen if you put the right message out. So Anoop introduced me to Megan Fitzgerald, who at that time, she just had become the head of healthcare investing for a multi-family office that did work across different industries, but they had just set up a healthcare arena multifamily office called Letter One that they wanted to get into the innovation economy, right? And so Megan, based in New York, she was a non-traditional hire to head this, because what were her other roles? Was an associate professor in Columbia University in public health. She has just trained as an emergency room nurse. She was involved with several. She was high up in the Pfizer team at one point, in the Cardinal Health's team at one point. So very broad, eclectic background, and author of books, et cetera, right? So, but she was leading it up. So she's a very refreshing person to talk to in the investment world, who had a landscape to look at for where is she going to invest as head of healthcare for this multifamily office. So ultimately took a couple meetings with her, and she's like, are you ready to get back into this? I'm like, I'm not sure, but I'm happy to help you think about this. And as through the meetings, I think the rapport there, the belief that might be a group that could be very long-term minded behind this. And Anoop and I both started thinking about this as how we might do this. And ultimately it led to founding K2. Long story short, they committed $400 million in capital, which does not happen every day. Right? That was at some point you have to check in. You're like, okay, that is a rare occurrence that somebody is offering us $400 million to start our thing. And the Evergreen, going back to prior part of our conversation, Evergreen structure, because they were long-term minded. They wanted to make impact in the innovation economy. They were open. They were fine with the fact that a percentage of profits out of their pockets are going somewhere else, out of all of our pockets are going somewhere else, right? So that was a rare coming together of various things that we decided, let's go for this, and started K2 in late 2018. And, now it's been 6 years in.
That's amazing. And it sounds like the fundraising experience was a stark contrast to the previous one when you were younger and you're just like, all right, I'm going to raise my first time fund.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's a good point. And it's like how different it can be with experience. And, then you have to, have a little bit of luck, which is, I think we've often heard that's when opportunity meets preparation, right? We were prepared to take advantage of it, but we were ready to say, like, this is what we want to do. And there was a willing buyer, if you may, to say, yeah, that sounds great. And here's 400. And then a couple of years later, they doubled down and now it's $800 million in a permanent, permanent balance sheet investment fund, which is private. So we don't have the public pressures, but we have a permanent balance sheet. So we're able to really provide capital in a long-term basis and do the diligence and be good partners to our companies alongside these use cases, be long-term partners, and also create a foundation and put money out that way as well. So we're, living that dual dream of profit and purpose, in over these last few years. And it hasn't been without its real challenges and difficulties and needing a lot of persistence and getting through the COVID years, still growing a team in the early years of that, keeping a culture, trying to get together often enough across multiple offices, despite being a small team, and in our more distributed work nature that is today post-COVID compared to pre-COVID. So a lot of management growth challenges, but all good if you keep it in perspective and keep the balance along the way. It's all sustainable, right? You can still be in the moment, enjoy things, and not feel like, oh, I've given up everything just for this. No, I'm doing this alongside the rest of my life, but it's been very fulfilling to see what we've been able to put together and create and work with some. Biotech is really fun that way to work in because you're really working with companies that are potentially making life-changing, therapies. And we also work in the healthcare space, where there's a lot of new innovative healthcare models that are trying to work on more prevention and care models that are working in that space. And we have some people who really understand that arena who have taught me a lot, right? Like you hire people who I don't know as much of my experience is more biotech, but, we have our first employee we hired who's both key to our culture and somebody who I've worked with for 17 years. We hired him as a Northeastern co-op at Hercules. And over 17 years, we've worked together only with maybe a 4-year gap in between.
Wow.
All those times. And he was employee number one, and he leads a lot of our healthcare stuff because he had real on the ground experience with one of the top healthcare companies in that space, on the ground experience. So he's taught us a lot in that world. So again, getting really good people around, getting people who understand different areas, and fortunate, grateful.
Very cool. And I think thinking about K2, and there's a couple, if we zoom out, I think something that stands out to me is that you like you described, you have the evergreen structure, and you're a private investing company that gives you the ability to work with founders in a different way. Can you just can you unpack that a little bit? For those who might not be aware, what is an evergreen structure, and why does it matter, for a founder or a company?
Yeah, the benefit we have, the good fortune we have, is that we don't have a clock that says, hey, we're in year 5 of our fund, and our fund is a $500 million fund, and we've invested $450 million of it so far. And it's a question on entrepreneurship, and you're our last investment in this fund. And don't worry, we reserved enough capital for you. But then they have other portfolio companies, and they have to also, think about allocations to them. And then you're 5 years in, and they're like, well, sorry, that fund is done, and it's hard for us to cross over and provide you capital from our next fund because there's different investors in fund 2 versus fund 1, and it wouldn't be fair. So we're kind of done. Versus in an evergreen structure, we have the benefit of we just have one fund, and we can recycle our capital, and we can grow the fund, and we can put more capital out. And look, you can work this in an LPGP structure too, right? There's plenty of people who do. So it's not like I don't want to make too big a point of this. There's plenty of LPGP or pseudo evergreen structures that will work for you just fine. And for the most part, that doesn't become a big deal, but it's a question people should ask, like, where am I in your fund cycle?
Yep.
In terms of that, we don't have that issue.
Very cool. And in a similar fashion,
we don't also have to spend as much time of our management time out there, fundraising, if you may. We can spend more time on investing in operations and that side.
Absolutely. And I think about Exceeder too. And this was in the beginning, I didn't realize this was very strange for a leasing company, but for us, just in a similar way, we're evergreen because we don't manage outside capital. We're just deploying off our balance sheet. And I think that gives us, and that was always the thing for us, is how do we're in this for the long haul. We're exactly what you described in the very earliest top of our conversation, is that life sciences takes a long time to come to fruition, and you need those patient capital partners that are ready to kind of be there and in the boat with you rowing. And for Exceeder too, that's kind of has always been our ethos. We're in it for the long haul, and the structure of how your company is is foundational. How is it capitalized? All of these horizons are incredibly important, and questions that founders should be asking themselves about whenever you're about to, sign up for, when you're raising capital, whether it's equity, whether it's debt, or everything in between. And now that you've kind of solidified your capital base for K2, and you've have key core hires, can you talk about what are the companies that you guys seek to work with, and you talked about the products that you offer across the capital stack. Can you talk a little bit about that, the companies you work with and the products that you support founders with?
Yeah. So, we're working with private and public life sciences and healthcare companies we're not the seed capital, because that needs to be the equity risk capital. We're typically coming in post the first institutional round all the way through a mid-cap public company. So from being maybe, your Series B company through being $1 billion public company, we play all in between there. In life sciences, we're providing, we also work with biotech, medical devices, tech-enabled healthcare services, and some companies that are on the edges of that, like some consumer health stuff, et cetera. But broadly in life sciences and healthcare. And again, the core piece is just being able to provide less dilutive capital to companies along that capital journey. And then also participating on the equity side, we have we can do up to $10 million bite sizes in equity. So it's sizable enough that when we're participating in rounds, we can be a good partner there, particularly in companies that we're already involved with on the debt side.
Very cool. And I think that's one, for founders, incredibly invaluable to be able to have a partner that can kind of one-stop shop, because it is, I got to say, you were talking about the, raising funds is time consuming, and much like for founders out there who are raising capital, fundraising is a time consuming endeavor. But if you can have a capital partner that can, provide a slew of options for you, it's just that much more efficient. So you don't have to
Yeah.
continuously be on the hamster wheel of fundraising from various, piecing together various capital sources and products, when a firm like K2 can piece it all together and be there and grow with you.
Yeah, and we can be we're definitely can go across the boundary, which is what we wanted to create. And we work with the whole ecosystem. We're partners with a lot of the venture capital community. We work with we're getting referrals for new investments from board members and entrepreneurs and those we've worked with before and those who know us, and et cetera, et cetera. So
critically important. And I think whenever I think about healthcare and life sciences, it truly takes a village, and no one can do it alone.
Yeah, and on that note, I think the other very good fortune we have at K2 is that Anoop and I are co-founders, and that burden is not on one person, it's split around, and we both have different strengths and weaknesses and complement each other to the extent that we're very oftentimes when we're building this, it's very natural for him to take one arena and me to go in a different arena, often even without having to talk so much. So that way, again, fortunate to have built that working relationship and that trust over time, because there's obviously always pros and cons of founders, but if you can find the right co-founders, there's so many more pros than there are cons in that. I mean, yes, you have to share, and you have to share sometimes decision responsibilities, and that can be sometimes annoying or painful. Like, you're not going to agree on things. You have to figure out how to come to, but usually it leads to a better decision. Usually if you have a good working relationship and you're respectful of how each other thinks and how each other works, you get to a much better point. So a lot of gratitude again for my co-founder in this process of building the culture, everything that I'm able to do it together, because it can be lonely. At the top, you can't share everything that's happening and the trials and tribulations and the worries, but with your co-founder, they're in that same boat, right? So okay, I don't know where this is going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think too, I know people talk about it where people describe the co-founder relationship as like a marriage, and it's like a healthy, it's like every healthy relationship, right? You kind of have to have the ability to cover each other's weaknesses and, kind of lean into your own strengths, and having someone that you can lean on when things get tough, because whether you're starting a company, whether you're an investor and raising funds and you're on the other side, shit gets hard.
Right. It is hard.
Shit will get hard. And you need someone.
And it's often harder than you actually even think it's going to be.
Yeah. Exactly. And
by nature, entrepreneurs, you have to be optimists. So you always underestimate.
Exactly. And you have to.
You have to. I mean, but that's almost by definition, that's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And
otherwise you wouldn't do this.
Exactly. And I think picking your co-founder and picking your team is just, I can't understate or overstate how important it is. Because I think a lot of times people think that company death or organizational death comes from the outside, but usually it's from within. And finding the right teammates and right co-founders where you mesh well is how you get through those hard patches, because usually it's not the competitor that's going to kind of beat you. It's when there's these co-founder disputes or the company is just tearing itself from within, where you kind of defeat yourself. So I think if you're out there looking to start a company, start a fund, imperative that you find the right co-founders where you can cover each other's backs and weaknesses and lean into each other's strength to complement each other. And, looking 1 year, 2 years out for you and K2, what's in store for you guys? What's on the horizon?
sticking to our knitting and really continuing to grow down the path of, we have a couple of areas on the one side, you're doing what you do, but there's always areas on the edges where like, well, should we do more here or do more there? Should we look at a couple more international opportunities? Should we look at some bigger deals? Because in our landscape, as biotech has grown and products have gotten further and further, the need for capital, went from like, 25 to 50 was large. Now, there's $100 to $200 million deals that are getting done in the venture debt space, right? And these are still companies that they just got their approval, they're commercializing, or they're close to that pivotal phase 3 trial and believe they'll get approval and need a lot of capital. So there's expansion opportunities for size of deals for certain geographies. That's the one side. That's on the investment side. Clearly there's team growth that will still happen. But we don't need to become we're a 19-20% organization now. Like, we probably don't need to be more than 25-30 people, and we can do a lot more. We have a lot of scale and leverage left there. And then there's the growth of the foundation side. It takes a little while to put that in place. It takes a little while to know how to make grants well. And I'm not even saying we're close to that, because that's not our core business, right? But we have created a ability to have this pot of money to say, how can we put it to work in underserved healthcare? So we've done some things on our own and tried to put some grants in places where we think are deserving organizations that are doing really good work. But we've also partnered with organizations that have helped, that do this more. The Focusing Philanthropy is one of them. Life Sciences Cares is another. They're made up of life science executives who started with the mission of doing anti-poverty work in your local community. So Life Science Cares Boston funds a lot of anti-poverty work with local nonprofits. And this year they started a health equity initiative, which we were the main seeder behind, to fund that new set of grants and programs in health equity. So those are the type of, things that we're looking forward to, things where we can do more of the same in bigger quantities, and hopefully have more impact both on the investment side and the foundation side.
That's amazing to hear. And I'm thinking, just hearing your journey is, I love that you were able to really blaze your own path and really create a firm that is driven by the values that you wanted to be at the forefront and be the guiding North Star, especially having these experiences that can be a bit tumultuous, and taking that and then having it inform and help you design K2 to be the firm that everyone wants it to be and the team wants it to be. I think I can imagine, you're talking about the foundation side too. It's like, it's like a whole different muscle. And, again, it's kind of like almost like launching a new product line, or even almost like, is it kind of like entrepreneurship? You're doing it again. But I'm so excited to watch you guys, continue to do your guys' work from the sidelines. It's really exciting to hear what you guys are doing. And obviously it investing in life sciences and healthcare, it's just like you described, it's a fun place to be in. It's not always puppies and rainbows, but I get out of bed fired up every time, and I'm so thankful for being in this space. And Parag, you've been so generous with your time, and thank you for having the conversation with me. And in traditional closing fashion, we have 2 closing questions. First is, would you like to give any shout outs for anyone who supported you along the way?
There's so many people that help along the way, out there in different walks of life. There will be a lot of individuals to list, but I will say, as foundationally, as I said before, if I think about where my energy and power comes from, it comes from my family and, my spouse, foremost and forefront, our kids who provide us a lot of energy, and then the foundation of that and love and care that my parents initially provided to me and my sister, and the relationship I have with my sister, and all of that, I think, is a blessing that kind of keeps giving, and allows me to do all of this in a way that is, 1 + 1 = 3 or 4 or 5 along the way, rather than being detracting. And I feel it's almost that much harder if you're a single parent, or you have a hard relationship in your family, whether that's with your parents or spouse. So I have, again, the blessings of not having some of that. That is not, everybody goes through their stuff where, in the past, you've had hardships to deal with, and, you learn from them. My wife's father passed away very young in our relationship, and you learn, you kind of deal with that loss, and it affects you throughout your life. But you gain that much more perspective to really value, everything that you do have in that process. So yeah, lots of friends along the way, and, colleagues to, plus I mentioned some of them along the way, but yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, is like for entrepreneurs, it's like your partners are also on the entrepreneurial journey. So it's always right. And so it's critically important to have supportive friends and family, because again, it takes a village, not only within your company, but even at home, because it's like, when things get tough, I think about my wife too. Like in the earliest days of Exceeder, there were days when we, in the very beginning, there was no revenue coming in. And it's like, how do you make rent? Well, you can't pay rent with $0. So, my wife was so generous to be able to, spot me, to basically spot me for those early days. And I'm eternally grateful. And it's things like that where I'm just, it's, you can't do it alone. And
yeah, no, absolutely. And credit to you. You've been now, 15 years in?
Yeah.
Or so? That's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, and I think, that's, I think the I always like reflect on this, and hearing your story as well. It's just like, there are these people who, without their support, you just wouldn't, you wouldn't be where you are today. And I always think it's important to express the kind of, the gratitude around it. And in the last closing question, if you can give any advice to your 21-year-old self, what would it be?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Mention maybe one or two of these things, and might add a thing or two to that, but try and hone in on your priorities and find the balance. Find the balance would be one of the key things that I would tell my 21-year-old self. And I think I've been decent about practicing it, but you can always be better. Be in the moment, right? There's so much going out there all around. There are so many distractions. There's good things, there's heartaches, there's bad things, there's messages now, there's social media, you get pinged, just be in the moment. I'm having a conversation with you right now. The goal is to enjoy that conversation, because it makes it that much richer, rather than thinking, oh gosh, you know what, when I get off this call, I got to check these 4 emails, respond to this person. We have to make this decision. Oh, this company's having an issue. No, that's going to happen anyway, right? So don't use up brain space, be efficient about using that. But that really practicing being in the moment is something, it's like a New Year's resolution every year for the last 10 years, because you can always get better at it.
Yep.
We're all very distractible that way.
Yep.
And then I think the next big thing is I didn't talk that much about this, but I, always been drawn to philosophy and comparative philosophy. And, I grew up in a Hindu and Jain family, and, but still pretty open. And, Hinduism also says very clear about, not some of the way it's being practiced today in certain areas, but very clear about hey, take from this what really can help you. And you may not believe it all, but take what you do. And so borrowing from different principles, there's a principle in Hinduism more fully fleshed out in Buddhism called dukkha. And really just translated means just get used to pain. Like people will sometimes translate it as get used to pain in your life. And that pain is all around you. But it's really what it's saying. The real word says just get used to the fact that things aren't always easy. There's uneasiness. Life is a little bit of like a wobbly wheel that was not a perfectly balanced wheel that keeps running all the time. There's bumps along the road. And if you know that's going to be the case, then you won't spend your time worrying about, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Like, yeah, shit's going to happen. When you're happy, things will get worse. When things are bad, things will get better. Like it's the cycle. And the more you can get used to this idea that any one state is not permanent and get used to that idea, the less worry and energy you expend on those things that will happen whether you worry about them or not, right? And so I think that those things where I spend way too much time, like as we all probably do at different times, worrying about things that just took away energy, right? Or took away sleep, or didn't allow you to concentrate, or it didn't allow you to enjoy something. So the more and more you can imbibe that, I think the happier your life will be. At the end of the day, what this is all about, like the end of the day, it's about happiness, right? Not about all these other things, but we're all trying to find that. So,
and that's spot on, because I think too, my co-founder actually just recently texted me this, is just enjoy the journey, and then that's not just in business, but obviously it's for life too. Our life is just comprised of moments in time, and if you're overly fixated on this future state that may or may not come to be, you're going to miss this moment in time right now, which you described.
Absolutely.
And you don't get that back. You don't get that back. And I think, especially in entrepreneurship, if you don't take a moment to just enjoy where you're at because for me, when I'm talking to my co-founder, sometimes I can find myself, I'm just like, okay, but the next step. What about next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? We're forecasting. He's like, whoa. Let's take a moment, just appreciate where things are right now, because there's a bunch of stuff to be super excited about right now. And enjoy it. And even sometimes do the painful stuff. And again, like what you described, this too shall pass. Because if we're using your energy and expending all of that to just, think that this is permanent and, you'll never get better. You're just it is a waste of energy. And so I think any founder out there should take this to heart, because you too will also get through it, whether it's, the hard patch or, even the highest highs. You'll eventually come back to normal. And I think that balance that you've been describing isn't talked about enough in entrepreneurship, because it's always up and to the right and just gas it. But I think the balance is critically important. And I think for a 21-year-old self, me, I think I needed that advice. And I wish I heard it earlier. But Parag, thank you so much. You've been incredibly generous. And, we're recording this. It's pre-JPM. Maybe if you are at JPM, I'd love to meet up with you in person. Maybe
That'd be
grab
great.
a coffee.
That'd be awesome. I will be there.
I can do this for hours with you, but thanks again. And hopefully, I'll see you in the month or two.
Yeah, no, really appreciate the time and all your effort. I know it takes a lot of energy to do this, but you're doing a good service out there for the community. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, Parag. See ya.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed part 2 of our conversation with Parag Shah. If you did, consider subscribing, leaving us a review, and sharing it with your friends. Be sure to join us for our next series, featuring Ozan Atay, co-founder and CEO of Billion to One. Billion to One is a precision diagnostics company that quantifies biology to create powerful molecular diagnostics. They work to improve disease detection by counting molecules with their proprietary molecular counting platform. They place patients at the forefront of everything they do and are currently applying their proprietary technology to non-invasive prenatal screening and liquid biopsy. Ozan holds a PhD from Stanford in systems biology, where he implemented machine learning algorithms and mathematical models to solve specific problems in cellular biology and developed a data-driven mathematical framework to simplify the analysis of complex biological networks. He also has a degree in molecular biology from Princeton, as well as a minors in computer science, physics, and applied mathematics. Ozan not only combines deep technical expertise with visionary leadership, but he also has an incredibly inspirational immigrant journey, which makes this series a must-listen for first-time founders, scientists, and industry leaders alike. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceeder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.